Hello dear subscribers, you're on the channel Gossip Says. Today you will find an interesting story. Enjoy watching. The woman begged for money to save her sick father, but she refused and bought herself an expensive car. Vivian was about to go to bed. It was late and so late, making a shopping list for tomorrow. But suddenly the silence, already sinking into the sleep of the apartment, was broken by the trill of the phone call. Instead of a greeting, the receiver barked. "I have a problem. My husband kicked me out. Tomorrow I'm moving in with you and my dad will live at home." The woman even flinched, pushing the tube away from her ear. "Look," Amanda said with all the calmness she was capable of now. "You don't have parents anymore. You don't have a parent's house either." Vivian wanted to hang up, but she sounded hysterical. "What? What did you say? What do you mean? No, I'm your only daughter." The woman sighed heavily, trying to end this unpleasant conversation, and said firmly, "You are no longer our daughter, and the apartment belongs to Victoria. So don't call anymore. And I try not to listen to self-curse." She quietly put the receiver down on the lever and then stood for a long time, looking out the dark window, trying to calm the bitterness rising in her soul. Vivian had every right to treat her own daughter that way, but her mother's heart did not feel any better. Suddenly she remembered that this whole story had also started with a late phone call. How many years had passed? 10 or 12. It was very important to remember, for that was the last time she had heard Vivian's voice. "Vivian, Vivian." Sobbing came out the phone then. "I beg you, don't leave with Oliver. She is just a baby, and tomorrow is the surgery. I'm very afraid, promise." The connection was cut off. The next morning, Vivian and her husband rushed to the next town to find out what was wrong. Vivian's younger sister, Emma, had always been an eccentric character. But this latest escapade was clearly beyond the realm of reason. She had to have guessed to make a late-night phone call and cause such a panic, and then not even pick up the phone. Only when the enraged relatives arrived at the address, it became clear that this was no joke. The grandmother, a neighbor, explained in a half-whisper that Emma had been in the hospital for a week, and that she herself drove her daughter there every day from school. "The girl cries all the time," begs her mother. "But the doctors are against it. The patients are all heavy. And that child with his childlike spontaneity. Yes, where does Emma lie? Tell me finally what's going on? Did Vivian explode?" And Grandma sighed heavily. "At the cancer center." All the way to the clinic, Vivian cried her eyes out. Her own baby sister is her little sister. Her sister is hopelessly ill. Her baby girl, to whom she replaced her mother who had previously passed away, her bully of an overachiever, hid the terrible diagnosis for 6 months for fear of becoming a burden. It was only concern for her young daughter that drove her to ask for help. God, how scary was that? When Emma arrived on the scene, they could see no more. The operation had begun. Only on the couch outside the operating room sat, living with a lumpy little Victoria. Vivian then hugged the girl gustily, and it clung to her trustingly, holding out a folded tighter sheet. "On Vivian, mother will not die." Vivian comforted her niece as best she could. Except that no miracle happened. The doctor who came out to the relatives helplessly threw up his hands. It was too late, and the patient's heart was weak. All the way back, Vivian kept rereading and rereading Nastya's last letter. She could have asked not to send Victoria to the orphanage. She and Oliver would never have thought of it, except that Amanda would be prepared. What is little sister going to live with her now? The girls are sure to be petted, even though they are cousins. But they are sisters. Oh, how wrong Vivian had been about her daughter. When Amanda heard that Victoria was going to live in her room, she pouted like a mouse, and in the evening he threw the things of the uninvited guests into the hallway, and threatened to do so every day until her parents find her another place. Spoiled from childhood, Amanda was not going to put up with such a neighborhood, and she wasn't going to share her parents. They had to move Oliver into the hall, freeing up the girl's bedroom. So did not want to ignite a silly war between sisters. About Victoria, Emma's father was never frank, so she and her husband had to take responsibility for the fate of the little girl, and they tried never to make a distinction between the girls. Both were related. Except the ladies didn't like that at all. Only time went by. Amanda successfully graduated from high school and then from college, and one day she announced to her parents that she was getting married. The groom, Jack, was 15 years older than the bride. In addition, he had a reputation as a wealthy man with a bad temper. But Amanda was not embarrassed. She quickly packed her things and left to her beloved. She informed her parents one last time. "The wedding is in a month. I am waiting for you." And under the tear, Urka, "No, I hate her. I cannot see her." She tried to talk sense into her daughter. But how could she not invite her sister? Amanda was the only one who wouldn't. "There's no room for her at my wedding. She even laughed when her parents told her they weren't coming either. But how are they going to explain to a teenager that they are invited without her? Fine, that's even better than you exalted lucky Amanda. And Vivian cried. How upsetting to hear that her own daughter didn't want her parents at the gala. But then she pulled herself together. They will definitely celebrate their daughter's wedding and go to the Crimea for a vacation. They can afford it. And so the three of them remained together, only occasionally receiving information from acquaintances about the poor life of their eldest daughter. Victoria grew up and excelled in school, and then playfully entered the institute. From her mother, passed on her talent for drawing and getting into architecture, was a kind of gift from the early Nastya. A year later, they celebrated Victoria's coming of age in a famous cafe in the city in a family way. That was when the first bell rang. Sergei Anatolievich suddenly felt sick in the midst of all the fun. He went terribly pale and almost fainted. And the next day, Vivian herself took her husband for an examination, and the doctors did not go dark. The situation is grave. Emergency heart surgery was needed, and Vivian grabbed her head. The amount of money they couldn't afford, and Oliver simply couldn't wait for a quota. She was pacing around the house like a mad woman. But why couldn't they ever save for a rainy day? Suddenly it dawned on the woman Amanda. Her husband has a thriving business. The amount of money he needs will be no burden to him, and they'll pay back the debt little by little. Only it wasn't Jack who picked up the phone, it was Amanda. And listened to my father's problems without interest. She promised to talk to her husband and hung up. The daughter had to wait a long time for an answer. But even calling 2 days later, Amanda was not happy about anything. Jack made his wife a condition. Either he gives her father money for the operation, or he buys Amanda an expensive SUV. And Amanda chose the second. In vain. Vivian begged her daughter to change her mind, swore to give the money. In time, Amanda only grudgingly hummed. Madame, well, when will you give so much more? In a year or two, I will have such luck with the car, maybe no more. In the end, take a loan. Waiting Vivian, even the tube fell out of my hands. What loan? No one will approve this amount, neither pensioners, let alone a student. And then Victoria jumped up to the woman, wiped her tears with her palm, and helped her sit down. Aunt Vivian, let's sell Mom's apartment. I won't be able to live there anyway. It's hard. She hugged the woman warmly and smiled shyly. If you put it out at a cheaper price, we'll buy quickly. After all, the most important thing right now is for Uncle Serioza to stay alive. Vivian shook her head. I cannot, girl, your mother said so. And the quiet Victoria showed her character for the first time. Her gray eyes glittered with cold steel, and her palms clenched into a fist. Aunt Vivian, it's no time to wonder who would say what. Either help me or I'll do without you. The apartment surprisingly sold very quickly indeed. A month later, a very chipper Oliver returned to the family. He suggested that his wife sign over their apartment to her niece, after he had learned how much his health had cost him. Victoria, of course, refused, but they managed to cunningly get the girl to the notary. So without ceasing, she thanked her foster parents for such a gift. And then today came this unexpected call from Amanda. Once again, it turned a mother's soul upside down. Vivia looked away from the dark window and sat down at the dining room table. We don't have an Amanda daughter. Only Victoria is the only one. Pronounced as if she were putting an end to an invisible conversation. We have to go to bed. Tomorrow Victoria will bring the bridegroom to meet her. I want to look dignified. 5 years have passed since that night. Victoria married Vyacheslav and has already given Vivian and Oliver 2 grandchildren. Vyacheslav is a farmer and long ago moved his wife to the countryside. Only there Victoria does not sit idly by. She works remotely, often going to the city office in a small foreign car presented by her husband. They live in a 3-story mansion designed by Ira and embodied in the hands of Slavik. And this mansion is always a welcome place for Irina's parents. They even built a whole wing for them. But they are not ready to move out of the city yet. They only come for the weekend to get Vyacheslav out of work. He needs his rest too. If he doesn't want to rest himself, they'll have to entertain his father-in-law. That's out of the question. And the lady's parents hardly remember her except on her wedding day. Every year on that date Victoria books them a trip to the Crimea, and Vivian and Oliver accepted gratefully. They are still genuinely perplexed. How is it possible that the native daughter grew up a complete egoist? After all, she valued her father's life below a luxury car. And it is completely incomprehensible why the almost stranger's little orphan, ready to do anything for their happiness. Story 2. While his wife was in the maternity ward, her husband brought his mistress to her mother's house. The mother did not know whether to cry or laugh. Anna stepped back, letting the incoming son into the apartment, and raised her eyebrows perplexed. Jacob was followed into the hallway by a young girl, looking around curiously. "Ma, meet Mary." The elderly woman was bewildered as a couple, confidently entered the kitchen, and strained to think maybe a colleague brought. "What do you mean?" Mary started she was, but her son interrupted her. "We live in my room." "Do you mind?" Anna frowned. "What do you mean live?" "Wait, what about Sophia?" Amazed, she asked at the water and resolutely moved his head. "Sophia and I are divorcing, and with Julia we will get married soon." "You not worry." The elderly woman groaned, sinking on the stool, and Jacob led her by the hand. "And do not you dare pry into my life." The mother heard her son shout angrily, almost crying. She went back to the cupboard for the drops. The unexpected news made her heart acutely busy, and her blood pressure skyrocketed. Of course, she was not thrilled with the current daughter-in-law, but such an antics of her son was clearly not expected. Especially now, when Sophia was put on preservation. After all, the birth was at hand. The woman sat down under her cheek palm and mindlessly stared out the window, resolutely not knowing what to do. And from the room of her son heard the sound of kisses and unnaturally loud laughter of the new chosen one. Sophia was in the maternity ward at the same time. How was her Jacob? Alone. He's so unaccustomed to life, he doesn't cook or wash. He should have thought of moving in with his mother for a while. She would have advised him, except her husband's phone is unavailable for some reason. It had never occurred to her that her beloved hubby decided to change his personal life so drastically. And that's exactly what happened. Translated with www.deepl.com/translator, free version. No sooner had the door closed behind Sophia, who had left for treatment, as a man called for anger, and an hour later she was already at ease in the apartment of a married lover. First of all, Mary demanded that Jacob remove his wife's belongings from their nest, and he found nothing better than to put all of Sophia's small belongings into huge bales and put them in the trunk of his car. "Where do you take all this stuff? Sophia's an orphan, and she doesn't have any family." And Jacob's happy life with his new sweetheart began. But very soon the couple encountered their first problem. Only 2 weeks and lived quietly lovers. And then it became necessary to pay the rent, and Jacob was deflated. Ran to his mother to ask for a place to stay. It wasn't expensive for him. Madame taught him, trying to appease him. Sophia used to pay the rent. "I can't scrape together such a sum." Anna was even indignant at the time. "And you ask Sophia where she scraped up the points. But my son, he just brushed it off, and now she sits on my neck. I'll support her and the baby." Anna even choked with anger. How had she not noticed that her son had grown up to be an irresponsible egoist? So it was possible to work at 2 jobs to create a comfortable life for her beloved. And water for the family is not going to lift a finger. But still my mother let me talk her into it. She only warned her son to look for a place to live. She has high blood pressure. How long will she last next to the baby? After all, she had no idea. Jacob rejoiced and even pecked his mother on the cheek. "Don't worry, the baby won't interfere." He had already decided for himself that the light had no place in his life. And now, when the son brought his mistress into the house, Anna, as if a veil had fallen from her eyes. What a monster of hers, Jacob. Yes, at one time she too was left alone with a child in her arms, but she had parents and Sophia alone. Where would she go now? The woman suddenly remembered how her son had brought his fiancée to meet her. She even pressed her lips together. Too small, fragile, and from an orphanage, she was very unattractive. And she could hardly restrain herself from speaking out about her rank. Not of their class. "Thank you. I had a lot of experience as a teacher, so I had to be more restrained." He just gritted his teeth. "You're adults, do what you want. Just don't expect to live in this apartment." So the young couple went to a rental apartment right after the wedding. Sophia, contrary to her fears, turned out to be a gentle and compassionate person. And a great hostess, too. Where did she learn everything? Not in an orphanage. My mother-in-law really wanted to like her. She visited every week. She brought her own pies and jam for her mother-in-law every week. And, of course, accepted the offerings graciously. But after her daughter-in-law left, she always sent them into a bucket. She did not need to be poisoned before this frostbite. It is now, looking at herself from the outside, the woman realized that she simply copied her mother's behavior toward her brother's wife. Unfair and wrong, that of course. But her actions at least justified the eternal mother's jealousy. But what he did, sonny son, cannot justify anything. Only there is nowhere to go. Had to adapt to the mistress Jezobel the same. It was difficult. Oh, how difficult. Mary turned out to be a lady, shouty, arrogant, and agitated. She slept until noon. And then the phone showed up until evening. Didn't help around the house from the word go. At any request of an elderly woman, she broke into a shout. And if now Anna was offered in one of the daughters-in-law, she would definitely choose Sophia. Could you even live apart? Only no one asked her opinion. My son was working late at night. Didn't want to listen to his mother's moralizing, and the beams lying on the couch were better left alone. And then there was another attack. Sophia called every day, worried about her husband. I even had to lie to the girl that Jacob's phone was broken. I can't upset her by cheating on her. In 5 days, the cesarean planned and so to term does not prove. All the troubles fall on the girl. So Anna decided to save the family at all costs. The first thing she did was to go to fortune tellers. But the magical incantations didn't help. Then the woman decided to take a risky step. She called her son's work. She asked for help from his boss, saying that he had prescribed the dog. But the baby was about to be born. Only her plea succeeded. Reverse success. Jacob came into the dwelling in the evening and like a dog and yelled from the threshold, spitting. I asked you to stay out of my life. Sophia is dearer to you than your own son. So live with her on your own. And you don't know whose kid is whose. Maybe it's naked. You're in trouble. And with the mother's slap, I was able to stop the hate flow. Out of my house, the bastard spit out. Woman, right to my son's face, and sucker, take your crap, and I will not leave Sophia. So you know, and she kept her word. A few days later, Anna was meeting her daughter-in-law at the maternity hospital. A young mother was sitting on a bench crying quietly, as if he had gone to his mistress. Everything was fine with us. Anna, sweetheart, tell me, are you kidding? Only the new grandmother sadly shook her head, looking at her grandson's pink face. Do not cry, honey. What handsome little boy like his father, isn't he? Despite Sophia's protests, her mother-in-law took her to her place. We'll live together. Maybe Jacob the Wranglers will show up. Only Jacob did not return in a week, a month, or 3. Through mutual acquaintances, Anna learned that Mary Notorious long ago left Jacob, except that he was in no hurry to return to the family. That's when the conversation between her mother-in-law and daughter-in-law took place. Serious conversation. Anna categorically demanded that Sophia filed for divorce and alimony. She called on the eve of her son in secret, only she heard nothing new, and the child is not his, and the mother of the bastard took in someone else's girl and threw the pig out. What else can you expect from such a scoundrel? After 6 months, Sophia was about to leave her mother-in-law. She understood that not quite a healthy woman interferes with the crying of the baby. Only Anna waved her hands at her daughter-in-law. You're not in place of a daughter now. And Sergey is just a baby, where can you go alone? And so they lived together. A year later, Sophia got a job, and Grandma took care of her grandchildren. That's when her pedagogical experience came in handy. When he was 3, Sergey not only said sensible sentences, but learned all the letters. There was no doubt, that's for sure. Her grandson's son, you also developed quickly. Thoughts of Jasoja were very upsetting to the elderly woman. After all, after her mother had written her will for her grandson, Jacob cut off all contact with her. And from time to time rumors were heard that he was not doing well at work and had a lot of problems in his personal life. Jacob never married anyone. He lives with a woman about 10 years older, but it's not all smooth sailing there either. Only Anna tried not to worry about it. If he wants, her son will come back, and she already has a family, a reliable daughter-in-law, loved ones, and the sweetest grandchild in the world. She is not going to get involved in Jason's new personal life. She will do everything you wanted. Thank you all for your attention and see you all again.